Welcome to MuscleBox Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Box, and my co-host is Michael Harrison. This show is going to be all about nutrition, training, bodybuilding, with loads of banter. We're going to be giving you the evidence, the science, and breaking that down with the help of some amazing guests and industry leaders to give you that application. So make sure you subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the show. MuscleBox Radio, episode 13, I believe now, Mike. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very, very well, mate. Very well. And today we are very lucky to be joined by Richard Hooley.
Good morning, Steve. Good morning, Mike.
Nice.
Morning.
So we thought it would be great to get Rich on the show, as not only is he also 4 weeks out now from his next competition, but Richard is a two-time world champion, Masters over 60 champion. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And that is with the DFAC.
Yeah. Which is the Drug-Free Athletes Coalition. So I'm a natural bodybuilder, water compliant natural bodybuilder, yeah.
Nice. So if we just start off with, who is, just for the listeners' benefit really, kind of, if you had to give a synopsis of, yourself, kind of what you get up to, what's your job, all that sort of stuff, then, who is Richard Hooley?
Okay, well, it's a long story because it goes back quite a long way, but in a nutshell, for my job, I'm an academic at the University of Bath, so I'm an associate professor of biology at the University of Bath. I've done sport all of my life, so I've always been doing competitive athletics. As a kid, I was a rock climber in the early stages of my life. I've been a surfer and kite surfer pretty much for as long as I can remember. In my 30s, 40s and 50s, I was a fell runner and adventure racer, and I took up bodybuilding in 2010 and competed in my first bodybuilding contest in 2011. So I guess you could say I'm an academic who loves sport and loves competitive sport.
Nice. Strong.
Just a bit then.
Just a few things there, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a few things. Right, well, so when did you, obviously for that transition from being a fell runner, when did you start bodybuilding?
I started bodybuilding in about 2010, so I'd done fell running for about 15 years and was quite successful at that. I loved doing it, really enjoyed running through mountains, doing 2-day mountain marathon races, but I got to a point where I can remember I was sitting in a stream in the Western Black Mountains in South Wales with a friend of mine, just looking at some guys who had been racing who were in their 60s. They were from North Wales and they'd come down to do a South Wales Fell Series race with us. These guys were really hard to beat, right? They were they were hanging on to us and trying to overtake us. And sitting in this stream, I remember looking at these guys and saying to my friend Helen Bennett, who's a very good distance runner, when I'm 60, I don't want to look like that. They were great runners, but they were really wiry guys, if you can imagine what I mean. So they were like
quite sinewy,
very sinewy, very wiry. They were like greyhounds, and fending them off on the mountains was really hard. And I thought, okay, I can see I'm headed in that direction as a distance runner, but I'm not that comfortable with the idea. So at that point, I retired from fell racing. It was that afternoon I gave fell racing up, and I started training in a gym, looking into resistance training, and kind of became aware that if you're a distance runner, you're burning so many calories doing these ultra distance. So I'd typically run 4, 5, 6 hours a day at the weekends in mountains. You're burning so many calories that ultimately you eat into your muscles, and that then leaves you with your joints not being well protected by sufficient muscle mass around them. So I began to learn about that in 2010 and started to try to strengthen my knees, strengthen my glutes, and get my glutes firing more effectively in order to try to build up a stronger lower body physique. So it kind of started from that. It was transitioning out of distance running into trying to put a bit more muscle on my frame.
So when did you first step on stage as a bodybuilder then? Or maybe you missed a bit. What kind of then, what inspired you to get into bodybuilding? Obviously you've gone in this sort of, I'd call it like maybe rehab, or rehabilitation from fell running into just being a more kind of sound, structured, little bit more well muscled. But then what was that spark?
What was the catalyst?
Yeah,
for that?
do you know what? I want to start bodybuilding.
I was looking for something else to do, so I was looking for another sport to do, and I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I used to train a lot at Club Basanta in Lanzarote. I would go there and train. I would see triathletes. There were some British physios there who worked on me whilst I was out in Lanzarote, and I'd say to them, look, you've had a really good look at me, tell me what you think I could be good at. And they all came up with the same conclusion, which was I should be an Ironman. And I really did not fancy that whole thing of being in the mix in the swim just totally did not appeal to me. It looks absolutely horrendous. What happened was that while I was training in the university gym, people would come up to me and say, excuse me sir, do you mind me asking how old you are? And then make a comment about my body. And that happened a lot, to the point where I got quite uncomfortable about it, because they'd clearly seen something in my physique and wanted to say something to me. One day a couple of guys came up to me and started the conversation in that same way. I was doing a lat pull down. I think they were looking at my back, and they said, excuse me sir, do you mind me asking how old you are? Have you ever thought of competing as a bodybuilder? And it turned out these two guys had both competed as bodybuilders, and they kind of saw potential in me. And that was the trigger, that was a catalyst where I thought, I hadn't thought of doing that, but I'll go and have a look at what over 50 bodybuilders look like. Yeah. So I went online, looked at the photos of over 50 bodybuilders, and thought to myself, okay, they've got more muscle than I have, but they're not as muscular as I had thought they might be. I could give this a go, I could give this a try. And then I spent 12 months preparing and entered my first show, which is the NABA West, in 2011. I entered the over 50 category and won that, and I was, at the end of my first show, I was an over 50 champion. And that's how it started. Oh, nice. So do you think then, obviously, from going from the position of giving up fell running, obviously you would have been a fit individual athlete anyway, and you'd have already had a lot of kind of probably some muscle memory there from rock climbing and everything else. In terms of, I assume you'll be up against guys who would have been bodybuilding for longer than yourself. So do you think that, I know, me and you have kind of obviously had chats before when I was at Bath and things, in seeing some of the data that you collect on yourself as a scientist, you probably see yourself similar to how I do your own scientific experiment. Yep, definitely. Do you think you've been able to kind of short track that journey to becoming a world champion through the use of monitoring what you're doing, being critical about your training design, your periodisation of your season? Do you think you've been able to make some sort of shortcuts there in terms of getting you that little bit further, rather than just trying to go to the gym without a kind of plan, without knowing how many calories you're intaking, and all this kind of stuff? Sure. Yeah, so what I found when I was on stage, and what I still find when I'm on stage, is I'm always up against guys who are bigger and more muscular than I am, and I have to figure out a way of beating them. So I've come from a background where I had very good cardiovascular fitness, so I was lean and athletic naturally, I was never overweight in my life, but always the emphasis for me has been on building more muscle and then being able to try and compete against guys who are physically bigger than me by showing really good condition. Yeah. You've mentioned I'm a scientist. Yeah, I'm a scientist. So naturally, my approach to things is an analytical one. For me, I need to understand what I'm doing, to collect data so that I can... So as a bodybuilder, from year to year, you want to improve, you want to be better, you want your muscles to be bigger, you want to be leaner, ideally, each time you appear on stage. You can either make a subjective assessment of that yourself by looking in a mirror and standing on some scales, and measuring your girths, or you can ask other people's opinion. And as a scientist, what I chose to do right at the outset was just monitor everything. So I've collected, starting in 2010, I've monitored my body mass weekly. From that point in time, I've monitored and recorded every calorie I've consumed each day since 2010, and I've recorded all of my workouts and all the weights that I've lifted. And in addition to that, I've had body composition analysis done. So working in a university, clearly One of the things you do as an academic is you recognise you're not an expert at everything, and in our university at Bath we've got some fantastic sports and exercise scientists, and I've been to them and said to them, can you help me? And so they've helped me collect, so particularly James Betts and a guy called Jonathan Robinson have helped to collect body composition data from me that we can store on the university computer server. And by taking those pieces of information, as well as on-stage photos, because they're kind of the reference points for me, what I look like on stage at each of the contests that I do, I've been able to make objective assessments of my progress week by week, month by month, year by year. So I've taken very much that type of an approach. Your question was, has that allowed me to get to the point of being a world champion sooner than if I hadn't done that? I think my answer would be, because I'm an academic and that's how my mind works, I would say yes, it has, without question, because it's taken away a lot of the subjectivity and given me an objective, data-based approach to it. But equally, I would recognise that you do not need a PhD in biochemistry to be a world-class bodybuilder. Clearly, you don't.
I mean, it's interesting because obviously we collect data as well with our clients, and it's something that I always go back to and go, if they have a wobble or those positions where they're, I don't know why you're laughing, Mike.
You laughed at the word wobble there, Mike.
Yeah, Mike had a wobble a couple of weeks ago.
Did you?
Yeah.
Just a bit.
Yeah. Ended up losing 8 kilos. How much was it, Mike?
I've now lost 9 kilos in about 10 days, 11 days.
Because he had so much water retention.
My God. How on earth did you manage to hold that much water in the first place?
I've absolutely no idea. So I was becoming. It happened last year during prep as well, but it happened in peak week, unfortunately, last year. I was beginning to show sort of signs of maybe overtraining, like I was dreading going to the gym, I mean really dreading. When I was in there, I was grumpy, moody, tired, my training performance was pretty poor. Right. And I think because I'd put on a little bit too much weight in the off-season, I had to be sort of really, really bang on for the last 22 weeks, and I've had to lose, I've lost like 24 kilos, so it's been
24? What's your body mass, Mike?
I'm weighing at 83 now.
I see.
So I've had to be pretty aggressive. So it's been pretty stressful prep, and I've had to be bang on and aggressive throughout. So I think it just took its toll, and it got to the point 2 weeks ago where I'd put on 3 kilos in a week, and I was really, really stressing, and I knew it was just water retention, because I'm not daft, I'd not overeaten, I'd stuck to everything. And my abs had gone, and I couldn't get my hand around my wrist, and my ankles were swollen, my feet were swollen, and
edema.
Edema. So
a 10% increase in your body mass due to water uptake. That sounds quite serious to me.
But I told Mike, have 4 days off training. He was on a holiday anyway, and just to have a few more refeed days in there, brought calories up a touch, dropped out the cardio, and he's all singing, all dancing now, and he's great. So it's just probably the point where prep becomes so stressful, it had such a toll on the body until we...
It might have been an infection, it might have been a virus or something as well.
Yeah, it could have. It could have been. And obviously I've still been in a calorie deficit for these past 2 weeks, and it is still an aggressive calorie deficit, so I would probably I've been losing a kilo a week anyway, so again, that's another 2 kilos that come off. Just through being in a calorie deficit, but so obviously when I say that I've lost sort of 8-9 kilos, 3 of it had been actually put on, so essentially I'm maybe 5 kilos down, 2 of that being what would have maybe come off anyway, and then possibly another 3 that I was holding anyway. But that
sounds like more than a wobble.
It's a worrying. Yeah, it's a worrying time when you start to see your weight go up so close to a show, isn't it? And it messes with your head, and even though you try and be rational about things, and you sort of know, you're sort of knowing yourself that, Mike, just relax, chill out. It can be hard to take that step back, and you do have to put your trust in somebody. And luckily, I had Steve there who was really, really good, and the other coaches as well helped me through it, and They basically just told me to do exactly what I would do to a client, you know. But you know, it just
hard to do it to yourself, isn't it?
It really is, and that's the whole point of having a coach, right?
Yeah, and I think like without all that data, like we had a conversation earlier before you came in, and you just said to me, all my numbers are up from last year. So whether it's your weight, more food, so you know that it makes sense that you're in a better position. So every day now, you know you're making more strides than you did last year. And so without that data, it's really hard to know what were you doing last year. Are you better? Because then you just constantly question yourself. You've got the facts there, haven't you, to go back to?
Yeah. Well, I think there we touched on some really quite relevant points for everybody. So clearly, Mike, not everyone's body mass is going to fluctuate 8 kilograms or 10% of their body weight per week, but the point you've raised there is that interface between anxiety and confidence about where you are. We know, and you will be aware of this, of course, because you spoke to Steve about it, that there's no value at all in getting anxious whilst you're in contest prep. You have to you have to ensure anxiety and uncertainty are not the feelings that you want, because they trigger hormones that you do not want to be elevating in your body. You have to have a mindset where you are confident, where you're confident about your progress and about your prep, that you're on target. And that whole sense of, I have to press really hard now, otherwise I may not make it, is not going to help you get towards your goals. Touching on that point about my records, so the kind of thing that I do, so my body weight changes by approximately 1 pound a week throughout the whole year. So my year's divided in two. I hypertrophy for half the year, I diet for the other half of the year. So no 2 weeks in a given year am I at the same body mass. So by keeping records of all of my training, the kinds of things that I can do are to say, okay, I was back squatting yesterday, and I know what my body mass was. What weight was I back squatting, and how many reps did I do at the same point, at the same body mass in 2015, in 2014, in 2013, in 2012, for example. So I can make a comparison like that, which goes back over a sufficiently long period of time. And as you will know, Mike, and I know Steve knows, bodybuilding takes time. You don't generate muscle that rapidly. It's a long-term commitment.
Such a shame.
Yeah. But so having those reference points allows me to look back through those points in time and say to myself, okay, I know I'm getting stronger. Equally, the body composition data and the body mass data, I can look at that, plot it, look at my data as I'm coming into a contest. At the moment, I know that I've already hit the same condition that I was at the Worlds last year, and I have more than 4 weeks to go. So I can go into my next contest with a really positive mindset that I know will help me.
Yeah.
I understand completely, Mike, as you've just explained. If my mindset changed and I became anxious about my prep for the British in 4 weeks' time, that would be counterproductive.
Yeah.
I'd start doing all of those things, start holding water, I'd start obsessing about a little detail, just not being cloudy instead of being sharp. So that that approach to establishing an environment in your life where day after day you are positive about what you're achieving at every stage in your contest prep is really important, as far as I see it.
I think for me, like, I see a lot of people go one of two ways. Like, a lot of people compare themselves with where they're not, and they constantly look at it and go, I'm not ready yet, these guys look like this, I'm so far away, rather than thinking how I kind of approach my prep is, God, I'm looking better today. Mm-hmm. Next day, I'm looking even better today.
Yep.
And then week by week, obviously there's those days where you might look a little bit softer or a little bit flatter, but ultimately, as a general picture, most days you're going into the gym, when you've got a pump, you're like, yeah, go on, let's have it. I want more of this. And then you just trust the process that day by day with that, it is a positive attitude and an outlook, because without that, then, you are going to self-destruct at some point. I see a lot of those people with the outlook of saying, I'm not there yet. There will be points where they might binge, or they might kind of have that point of self-destruction compared to someone who's on the journey and they're enjoying it. I've certainly seen that with Dan, one of our other coaches. His prep this year has been completely different because he's changed his approach. He's looking at this as he's already in the best shape of his life, and if he can present that on stage, that's going to be that's dot one. This is the first time he's competed, so he knows this is dot number one. So then every single year his goal is to try and improve on that. And this is where we look at that data, and we get him into a good off season to put some good muscle on him, and then he can have this objective opinion of going, is he making progress then is an off season. So what just for the listeners then, what kind of, if you had to pick 3 things to track which are really easily measurable without too much scientific equipment, what sort of 3 things would you say for someone to look at? Obviously you mentioned body weight.
Okay, well, so I think you need to do more than track 3 things.
Okay.
I think there are no. I'm often asked in the gym, what one thing should I do to get bigger? What one thing should I do to get leaner?
Yeah.
And you and I both know that it's not about doing small numbers of things.
Yeah.
So it's about it's about making every single day throughout the year count towards that goal. It's about having that point in time in the future. So for me, they typically are 1 year apart, World Finals, and recognising that if I'm training 4 days a week and I hypertrophy for half the year, that's 25 weeks approximately of hypertrophy, each one of those 4 training sessions per week is 1% of my overall progress, or is more than that. So if I train my let's say I train my shoulders 1 day a week and I'm doing it for 25 weeks, each session is 4% of my shoulders. Yeah. So if I bomb out on one of them, and when I next step on stage, I'm only going to be 96% on my shoulders.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
And certainly during my diet. So my diets are typically 25 to 30 weeks. I train 5 days a week when I'm doing my dieting. So again, each one of those sessions counts for a significant percentage towards my overall progress. Yeah. When I step on stage, I don't want to be 100%, I want to be 110%, so the judges look at me and don't recognise me initially. They do a double take and say, is that Richard?
God, he's made some improvements.
We didn't recognise you when you walked on stage, so you have to think of it in that way. So it comes down to, not does every day count, not does every session count, but how much do they count? They actually count for more than you might imagine. Yeah. They count for a bigger chunk. So in terms of, but I will attempt to answer your question, which is a fair enough one. What 3 things should I monitor?
I just think for people back home, what can they what are just some simple, it could be more than 3 like you said, just simple things that if you get an Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper, what sort of things can you look at to go to start to measure your progress without, obviously, as we know, you can take body composition assessments with skin calipers, and the guys
and DEXA scans
are pretty decent at that, but obviously it's not always...
Sure, no, fair enough. So I think then, so if you're a natural athlete, then your body mass will correlate very tightly with your strength and with your condition, right? So if you want to get stronger, you raise your body mass. If you want to improve your condition, you reduce your body mass. Those 2 correlate really very well. So it makes sense to monitor your body weight on a regular basis. The way I do that is I weigh myself once a week on a Saturday morning when I get out of bed having had a pee. So I just do that single time point. Okay. And I track that data over years and years. So clearly, as I'm sure when you're working with clients, if you're working into a smaller time frame than that, then there is some sense in monitoring your body mass at the same point in time daily per week, and then doing a weekly mean of those 7 measurements.
Yeah, that's how we do it.
So collect that data, and if you're going to collect that data, well, why not put it in an Excel spreadsheet on a computer and draw a graph with it? And then look at the graph, right? So you might put in a notebook, but if you put in a notebook, what will you then do with that information? It's far better to make a graphical representation of it that you can then look at. So measure your body mass. So I record all my training sessions. I'm really religious about doing this, and I find it's a vital part of what I'm doing. I think it's very easy to convince yourself that you're getting stronger when you may not be. You're simply getting heavier and you're picking slightly bigger weights up. I think it's easy to convince yourself that you back squatted more than you actually did back squat the other week, because it's also easy to convince yourself that you back squatted to full depth in really good form with a very heavy weight.
Yeah.
So critical assessment and recording of what you actually did during a training session, I think, are good things to monitor and collect somehow. I appreciate that for your average listener that might be a bit tedious, but
well, I think it's just being rather than trying to let your ego get in the way of your training, to actually sit back and go, did I hit full depth?
Yeah.
Did I train with the same tempo as I did before? Because as you know, you do a 2-second eccentric compared to a 1-second eccentric on a set. It's very different. They feel very different. Was I able to maintain lumbar at that weight? So it could be a case of, I might have increased by 5 kilos this week, but actually I felt on my last rep, maybe my form went, and it's just a case, even I use a really simple thing on my logbook. Tick means everything went great. Across means you need to do something about it, i.e. reduce the weight, and a little dash kind of means keep the load the same, and that will be improved form. So I've kind of got those three things, yes, you're good to increase weight, dash, keep it the same, work on form, or finally drop the weight, it was too heavy. And then just that simple reflection, when I come back to that session next week, I can look at that and go, okay, and then you can start to make, when I see a tick, I can then start to see where I've made decent progress or not.
So you can see, for those who are listening, or you can hear that it's becoming more complicated than 3 things. So Stephen, if you look at my Facebook page, you will see that I often post videos of myself when I'm training, and I put those up for information on Facebook, but I take those videos for a reason. So yesterday, for example, I was training legs in a calorie deficit, just 5 weeks out from the British finals, and I was back squatting, and I was telling myself that I was getting to a certain depth in those back squats. By videoing those, I can look at them during my session and get the real answer for how deep I was getting with my squats, or how well I'm doing a deadlift. So I think coming into the second point then, so 1, body mass, some record of training at whatever level of detail you feel you can manage. Clearly, if your goal is to be a world champion, there has to be a lot of detail in there. You have to be very strict and disciplined with yourself. But a monitoring of your training progress will help you. It will help you understand that you are getting stronger. It will help you recognise that as you're training for condition, to get that 6-pack, to get that leanness, that it's very difficult to maintain those weights, and it will help you then to inform your training as you're reducing your body mass. And it will also give you an indication that actually bodybuilding is a really tough sport. It's not something that you can master in a few months or a year. Now I say that because I think that's one of the reasons why I love bodybuilding, why I love natural bodybuilding so much. As a fell runner, I was totally passionate about fell running. I couldn't understand why people would ever want to lift weights in a gym when you could run on a treadmill. But as a fell runner, what I found was all you could do is run as much as you could, and try to run as fast as you can. You couldn't change your technique, you couldn't learn how to run like a Kenyan does off the ball left foot, you just had to do what you could do. The beauty of bodybuilding is there is so much to learn. You have to learn the technique for each of the exercises that you do. You have to learn how you can do different training splits, how you can periodise your training, how you can emphasise eccentric. There's a kind of a lifetime of learning to be had improving your technique in bodybuilding. And then on top of all of that, there's the nutrition and the physiology, which again is a science in its own right. That, as a whole, makes bodybuilding a really attractive sport to take part in, because there's so much to learn, and therefore there is so much that you can improve in. And we haven't even got to appearing on stage yet. Because again, that's an entirely new art in its own right. So the second point then would be monitoring your training in some way, shape or form to whatever level of detail you feel that you can manage. The third tip, the third suggestion I would give anybody would be, well, why are you doing this in the first place? Now, if you're doing it because you're going on holiday and you want to appear on the beach in a pair of trunks and look decent, that's a clear goal.
Yeah.
If you're doing it because you want to have bigger muscles and less fat, then that's a more complicated goal, because those two things are mutually exclusive. If you're doing it because you want to prep for your first bodybuilding contest, then you've got a point in time in the future when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think a really, really clear tip is to establish that deadline, that point in the future that you're working towards, because that allows you sufficient time to say, okay, what can I realistically achieve between now and then?
Yeah.
What can I honestly hope to bring by that point? And as I work towards it, as I'm 6 weeks away, 3 weeks away, 2 weeks away, 1 week away, I can make I can form a clear impression in my own mind of what is going to be possible. So a clear goal that you're working towards, and have that in your mind as a deadline.
Nice. And then where would sort of like calorie intake come into all this as well?
Okay, so from my perspective as a training, as a world champ. Okay, so
because you said about obviously you periodise your year, essentially 6 months off season, 6 months prep, and obviously you said you track calorie intake every single day, what you're kind of doing, and you sort of said how there's a correlation between
body mass and condition, body mass and strength.
And then where does obviously calories sit into this whole sort of? It's just great for the listeners, I think, to give a really good overview of kind of what your year looks like in terms of you said body weight but where does the kind of calories come into this?
Okay, so again, this is from the perspective of a scientist. So let's just recap on that. So I'm a former head of the Department of Biology and Biochemistry. I have a degree in biosciences, I have a PhD in biochemistry. I publish many papers. I teach genomics, I teach cell biology, I teach life sciences, I teach computational biology. So I'm a scientist, aka geek kind of person. I take a very controlling approach to what I do. So that's the context for this. When I started out on my journey as a bodybuilder, the first thing that I did was that I realised I had to understand my total daily energy expenditure. I had to know what that figure was. Otherwise it's pointless collecting calorie data. So the very first thing I did was to do a Catch-McArdle equation to work out my TDEs based on the parameters that you put into that equation: age, height, waist, etc. I then monitored the calories that I consumed daily for a period of about 3 months, and monitored whether I was on a rest day or on a resistance training day, and I had a goal of putting on a certain amount of weight. And after that, at the end of that 3-month period, I would look back over what I'd achieved and how many calories that I had consumed, and ask the question, did the Catch-McArdle equation predict the correct TDEs for a rest day and an RT day? And what I found was that it wasn't correct, it was slightly out. So what I then did was to tweak or adjust the TDE figures that I'd established, and then rerun that whole thing for another 3 months.
So you did a dietary assessment essentially over a 6-month period, monitoring intake versus weight change to establish weight balance.
To establish my total daily energy expenditure on a rest day and on an RT day.
Based on obviously if you'd have gained weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whether you'd have lost weight. If you'd have lost weight, then obviously the TDE wouldn't have been there.
No, the TDE is the same, but my calorie intake is below the TDE. So through my calorie tracking over the time, so the 6-year period that I've been doing it since 2010, each time I do a contest prep, each time I do a hypertrophy phase, so in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, each time I do a diet phase in each of those years, I start off with my plan, I record all the data, and then I say, okay, what did I actually do in relation to my plan? Because we all know you can have a plan for how much you intend to eat on each day as you're going through a diet, but there's also the reality of what you actually ate, and it's always slightly different. So I collect all those Excel files, I save them as CSVs, and because I do computational biology, I just use Python scripting to script all the data out of it that I need to, so I can ask any question that I want of that data. So I reinterrogate the data that I collect in order to understand exactly how my body mass is changing in relation to my calorie intake. So I know right now exactly how many calories I need to eat at this body weight in order to maintain this body weight.
Yeah.
I know how many calories I would need to eat in order to gain a certain amount of weight or reduce. So I've got, because I'm a scientist and because I'm methodical about collecting data and because I have recorded it over such a long period of time, I have a very clear idea about exactly how much energy I expend on a rest day, on an RT day. That's kind of the foundation stone, that's the building block for each of my phases of content. So when I go through a hypertrophy phase, typically I'll establish an approximately 20% calorie surplus on RT days, on resistance training days. I do maintenance on rest days.
Okay.
The reason for this is I get up, I have breakfast, and I train before I work. So a typical day for me is get up early, have some breakfast, get into the gym and train, and then do my day's work.
Yeah.
So my training is early in the morning. I then use the rest of that day to feed my body, i.e. trigger muscle protein synthesis, and then if the next day is a rest day, I take that day as a maintenance calorie day.
Yeah.
So on that day I'm not attempting to change my body mass. I'm not attempting to make it go up. So I then, on a typical hypertrophy phase, I will plan out the entire 25 or thereabouts, 25, 26 weeks of what I intend to achieve in terms of my body mass over that period of time, and then calculate how many calories have to go in on each of those RT days in order to establish the calorie surplus to build the muscle that I need.
And I think it's interesting, there could be someone sat here, listening, thinking, well, I don't have any data. But there would have been a point in time in 2010 when you had no data
I had no data at all, exactly.
So it is just literally a case of, if it's something you're passionate about and you're interested in this thing and you want to take a more evidence-based approach, and an evidence-based approach could literally be, you don't necessarily, like you said, need to have a PhD in biology and biochemistry. An evidence-based approach could be, let's record some data. Let's see what happens when we, make a hypothesis, like you said. Okay, so if I'm going to increase calories by 20%, let's see what happens. Let's review at the end of the week and then make an adjustment. That's an evidence-based approach, rather than just kind of putting your finger in the air or yeah, exactly. So I think just get yourself an Excel spreadsheet, track body mass, maybe track calorie intake, and then you can even start looking at macronutrient intake and that kind of thing. And yeah, hopefully you'll start to, over the course of time as well, I think people will go, oh, maybe I can track that as well. Maybe that it's a stage where they bring in more things. So don't sit there thinking, oh my God, there's all these things to track. Maybe just start with one thing and then start to build on that as you ingrain those habits into your lifestyle. I think might be a good way to go. Yeah,
and as you know, I'm sure you advise your clients that so I use Excel to collect my data in because I script data out of it, but there are apps that you can get commercially that will track all of this for you. But a big word of caution here, not everybody's a geek, not everybody's a scientist like me, and I know many amazing bodybuilders, many fantastic bodybuilders who do it other ways. They are in touch with their spiritual self, and that is enough, that is more than enough, and they're amazing people. So the description that we've just been through there would only suit the type of person who recognises that there's value in collecting information.
I think, for most of our listeners, they probably have an appreciation for an evidence-based background, just probably because they follow myself or Mike, and obviously that's kind of what we aim to try and put out on social media and things.
Sure.
But I think we might have to call that a day because I've only got the room booked until 11. But I would love to have you again on the show at some point. Sure. And I know that you've got a lot more to discuss. We could talk over your peak week, which I find fascinating, in how you structure things. We've obviously got lots of listener questions here, and also what you spoke about with gene manipulation, and maybe we kind of dedicate a bit more of a podcast to that if you're keen to come back.
Could do that. We can do a peak week one if you like. And so before we started this, I had a quick conversation with Steve about reprogramming your genome. So one of the things that you can do through diet and nutrition is influence the expression of genes in your genomes. So this is something you probably weren't aware of, but has come out in the scientific literature in the last couple of years or so, and it does have quite a significant impact on the way that you might go about doing your training and diet.
Yeah.
So, but equally, I'd be very happy to come back and talk about peak week, maybe after the British finals, and go run through how that went.
Yeah, definitely, and maybe we talk about how you're the way you peak, and obviously I'm peaking Mike for his show that he's got in 2 weeks. Yeah. Mike's show I've got in 2 weeks as well, where I'm doing my first bodybuilding show.
Okay. We got 3 peak weeks coming up.
Definitely,
then. Okay.
So we could have a bit of a round table on how it went and things. So
hey, how are you feeling about your show in 2 weeks' time, Mike?
Yeah, really good now. I'm definitely the leanest I've ever been. I'd say possibly just slightly leaner than last year before my show. Sat at a heavier weight, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I think it's just a case of cruising in and just filling out now, because I'm waking up pretty flat but really, really tight.
Yeah.
I'm really confident. The stress is gone, I'm back enjoying my training, and honestly I feel so fresh, so recovered. Like, I've got a smile on my face in the gym. I'm training hard. Before I was dragging myself around, and I just feel so good, and I'm just looking forward to the whole experience, really. And the hard work's done, and it's just a case of presenting it now.
Nice.
Sounds great. Good luck with that contest, Mike.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Rich, thanks so much for coming on the show. I will put out any links to your Facebook page, like your athlete page, so people can follow you, watch your videos, engage with you there, maybe ask you some questions if they have them. Yeah. As you are an extremely knowledgeable guy, and from talking to yourself, you do inspire me to improve the way I do things, and it's amazing. So I know your Facebook is at Richard Hooley, and that's HOOLEY, natural bodybuilder, so that someone could just type that in and find you. But we will put all the links up. Again, thanks so much to MuscleFood for continually their support with us, helping the podcast grow and get great guests on like Richard onto the show, and for all you guys out there who leave us reviews, ratings, share the podcast on Twitter and Facebook. I see all those, and it's absolutely fantastic, so please do tag us in. It really means the world to us. As we don't charge, or there's no profit made on the podcast. It is simply to help get information out there. So Richard, thank you so much, and it'd be great to get you back on at another point in time, and I'm sure the listeners will have lots of questions for you on it.
Definitely.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me. It's been a pleasure and really interesting to talk to you. Great to talk to you, Mike. Good luck again in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah. Great talking to you, Richard. It's been fascinating. I've just sort of sat back and listened and taken it all in. Just fascinating.
Right. Thanks
so
guys,
much.
and see you on next episode.